Hello everyone, welcome back. So in today's video, we are going to cover another exciting and widely searched topic, that is Azure API Management, one of the most important Azure PaaS service. So in this video, we'll cover what is Azure API Management, then how it works behind the scenes, and why should we use Azure API Management System. And once we understand the concept, then we'll move to the hands-on demo where we will build a simple front end in React, a backend in Node.js, and create an API, then import them in Azure API Management to see it in action. So let's get started and dive into the Azure API Management. So now let's try to understand what is Azure API Management is. So Azure API Management, often called APIM, is a fully managed service from Microsoft Azure that helps organizations to publish, secure, transform, maintain, and monitor APIs. It falls under Azure Platform as a Service. We call it as PaaS. Some of the key features of Azure API Management Service, those are API Gateway, a single entry point for every APIs or for your APIs. Developer Portal, where developer can explore and test those APIs. Analytics and monitoring to track performance and usage. And finally, that is security. This feature likes authentication, rate limiting, and IP filtering. So now to understand this with simple term, let's use an example. So think of Azure API Management as a restaurant menu. When you visit a restaurant, you don't walk into a kitchen to get your food directly. Instead, you order from the menu, which organizes all available dishes. The staff then ensure your order is prepared correctly, served properly, and recorded for billing. So in the same way, clients or application doesn't directly access the backend service or APIs. Instead, they go through Azure API Management, which act as like the menu, organizing, securing, and monitoring how API requests are handled and delivered. So just like a menu makes restaurant experience smooth and efficient, Azure API Management makes your API ecosystem structured, secure, and easy to manage. So now that we know what Azure API Management is, let's try to understand how it actually works behind the scenes. So let's first take a look at a traditional way without Azure API Management. Suppose we have a front-end application built in React and backend built with Node.js APIs. In this setup, a client which is in React app directly sends a request to the backend API, and backend API or backend simply accepts the request, process it, and sends a response back to the client. This is a standard front-end to backend communication. Now let's imagine we introduce Azure API Management into the system. When Azure API Management is added, the process is divided into three layers. Front-end, which is in React app, then second layer, which is Azure API Management layer, and third one is backend layer. So the client is no longer called the backend directly. Instead, it sends a request to Azure API Management. Azure API Management act as a gateway. Here, policies can be applied such as security, which means authentication and subscription keys, logging and monitoring, transformation, and caching. And after applying these rules, API Management Service forwards the request to the backend API. And the backend receives the request and processes it and sends a response back to Azure API Management Service. Then APIM can then further transform the response, add headers, or log activity before returning the final response to the client, which is React. So in short, instead of front-end and back-end directly talking to each other, Azure API Management act as a smart gatekeeper that manages and secure the entire communication flow. So now that we have seen how Azure API Management works, the next question that naturally comes to our mind, that is, why should we use it? Answer is simple. Azure API Management provides one centralized place to manage all your APIs with multiple benefits. That is number one, centralized management. You can manage all your APIs in one place instead of handling them separately. And number two, that is security. It controls access using subscription keys, auth, tokens, policies, and rate limiting. Then number third, that is scalability. It can be handled thousands of requests without putting extra load directly on your backend. Then number four, that is versioning. Easily manage old and new versions of API so you don't break existing app when rolling out a new feature. And finally, that is monitoring and analytics. Get detailed insight into usage, for example, failures, performance, so you can always know how your APIs are performing. So now let's make this easier to understand with a simple example. Imagine a banking app. A bank typically exposes multiple APIs like balance check, transition history, loan status, and so on. So if we use those without API management, each of these APIs is exposed individually. This means higher chances of security risk, scattered management, and difficult to monitor. But if we use with API management, instead of exposing each API separately, the bank exposes everything through one single entry point, that is Azure API Management. This makes it secure, monitor, and much easier to maintain. And that is exactly why Azure API Management is widely used by organizations. It gives structure, security, and control to the entire API ecosystem. So now that we understood what Azure API Management is and how it works, it's time to move to the hands-on demonstration. So here what I have prepared for this demo: a front-end application built in React, a backend application built in Node.js, where I have created a simple API that returns product details along with their prices. And then next, we will hand over to the Azure portal, where we will import the Node.js API into Azure API Management and see how everything works together in real time. So without wasting any time, let's quickly jump straight into the demo. So before we go into the Azure portal and create this Azure API Management Service, before that I'll show you what I have created. So in the VS Code, I have created one front end which is in React. So in that I have created, in using Node, I have created three APIs. One is for product, second is for orders, and third is for customer. So we are making the API calls and the data that we are iterating on the UI. So I'll show you how it works. Let's do npm start. So before that, I'll show you the Node code. So in that I have created three APIs. That first one is the products API, then the second one is the orders API, and the customers API. In that I have added this hard-coded JSON and returning these JSONs on this port 5000. So backend API is running on 5000 port. Okay, let's again go back to our demo and let's go to the UI. And you can see, once open it in inspect mode to see the API calls, just refresh one more time and you can see the products, orders, and customer APIs are getting called and the data is fetched and rendered on the UI. In this way, these APIs are created. So let's quickly jump to the Azure portal. So in this, once you log into the Azure portal, then you will be navigating to this landing page or the Azure portal homepage, where in that before we creating this Azure API Management Service, I have created one app service to deploy our backend or the Node APIs on the Azure. So for that, I have firstly created this resource group. So in that I have created this API management resource group. Once you click, you will be get the details of this resource group. Once you created the resource group, what are the backend services are getting added. And then after that, I have created one app service called AI API backend demo. So in that I have done the deployment through GitHub Actions. So for that, I have created one repo, and in that I have done this automatic deployment through Azure portal. Through Azure portal, you can see the deployment center. Once you click on this, then you will get on the setting part, you will get, I have connected with this organization TechnoAarambh and the repository name, that is API Management Backend, and the branch name, that is main, and the builder provider, that is GitHub Actions, runtime stack, and the version. So again, go to the overview page and let's copy this URL, and then again go try to check APIs are running or not. So I'll make api.products, and once you click, you can see the response is coming. So our product, then customers, and orders APIs are up and running. So now next part is that we have to create this Azure API Management Service, and then we have to import these three APIs in that Azure App Service, and then we have to integrate that app service URL to our React app. So now we have to create this API Management Service. So let's do search API Management Service, and then let's click on this API Management Service option. Then we'll be navigating to this page where we have to create or click on this plus create button. So once we click, then we'll be navigating to this details page where we have to fill the details. So like I'm using this pay as you go subscription, and the resource group that we have already created, that is API Management Demo. Then the region that we selected, that is Central India, then we have to give the name. So we'll give TA API Demo, and then the organization name that will give TA App, and the administrator mail that will add the administration email is required to if there are some notifications or notification will send on this email. I will use mine is at yahoo.com. Then on the pricing tier, you can select, you can simply click on the view all pricing tier, and accordingly you can select those. So I'll use the basic one, that is for the developer one. So SLA is not selected. The maximum number of scale out unit is 1, and it is for the demo purpose, so I'll use the developer. But if you want, as per your requirement, you can change the pricing tier, and I'll simply click on apply. So now we have entered all the required details. So let's click on review plus create button. So now it will validating the details that we entered, and once that is done, so let's click on the create button. So it is creating this our API Management Service. You can see on the right corner, deployment is in progress. So it will take some time for finalizing all the steps. So now the deployment is done, and once we click on this resource or the created Azure API Management Service, then we'll be navigating to this overview page where we'll see all the details like the resource group, the status that is online, the location that we selected from while creating this service, then the subscription ID, and the developer portal URL. So with the help of this URL, we'll make the front-end API calls from to calling this backend API. So, but before that, we have to create some products and APIs. So let's go to the side menu and let's select this option, that is APIs. Before we creating the APIs, let's create the products. Click on the products, and so here you can use the default product or you can create your own. So I'll create my own. So I'll give the add product name, display name. So I'll use the TA API demo, and in the description section API demo, and in the require subscription, that is we have added enable this checkbox, and let's click on the create. Once you click on the create, then the new product is getting created and listed on this list. So you can see this TA API demo is getting created, and you can see the details. So before we importing the APIs, we have to create the subscription. So in the subscription section, you can simply copy the default subscription where all the roles are aligned, or you can create your own subscription. So I will use the existing one. So again, go to the APIs. Here you can create the API. So I'll use with this HTTP. So let's click on the HTTP, give the display name, that is TA API demo, and the web service URL. So basically the web service URL, which means the endpoint URL where your Node API is running. For that we have created the app service, and the so API is running on this URL. So I'll add the web service URL, and in that API URL suffix I'll simply use v1. It is pointing to v1, and again we have created as a three APIs, that product, customer, and orders. And let's simply click on create. So it is creating the APIs or importing the APIs. You can see this TA API demo is getting created. So now it's created, but once we added this, but we have not added any operations or the existing APIs which is exposed from backend, those are not added over here. So for that we have to add it, or we have to click the add operations. So in that we have to add the first API, that is the product, and the name that is auto populated as per the display name, and the URL. So our URL is that products, and we don't need to add any other details. So let's simply click on save. Now our get product API operation is getting created. So now let's follow the same step to create for customers. and another for orders. Let's simply click on save. So now our three gate APIs are getting created. So let's again go to the products and try to test this if it is accessible or not. But before that, we have to do one more settings on the products. If you see the inbound processing, so in that we have to add the inbound policy rules. So let's click on the edit button, and because our front end is running on the 3000 port, which is localhost, so we have to override that rules over here. I have already copied this rule, so let's copy this one and then again let's paste. Simply save this rules. Now the API inbound processing rules are getting added. So again, go to the test, and here we have to test the API we are able to access it or not. But before that, you can see the request URL. So it is making the API for V1 products, so that we have added, and then our API is running on this. But before that, we have to add the headers. But for that, we have to copy the primary subscription key. So for that, I will copy simply this. Let's copy and go to the API again. Let's select this one. Go to the test. Let's try on the products. In here, let's click on add headers and select the option that is this one and enter the value. Let's simply click on send request, and you can see we get the response that is 200, which is okay, and we'll get the list of products, that is laptop, mobile, and headphones. So now again we have to same thing we have to do for the orders and customers. So we don't need to now test over here. We'll directly go to the front end on our app and we'll integrate over there. So let's go to the VS Code, and then let's replace the key that we just copied. Let's save here. Here what we'll do, we have created the base URL. So again, we have to add this inbound rules. I think we forgot to add these inbound rules for orders and customers. So let's again go edit the policies. Let's save this and let's do it for customer API also. And now again go to the VS Code and see what I have created. I have added the subscription key, created the base URL, and making these three API calls. So go to the UI and just reload. Let's clear the network tab and reload our app. And you can see the three APIs are getting called and the response is automatically mapped. So let's click on the product, and you can see we hit the API, that is HTTPS TA API demo API.NET V1 that we have added, API product API, which is running on the app service, and the response that we get. And you can see the headers. You can see that we have passing this header like subscription key and the value of that subscription. So in this way, you can make the API calls from using this Azure API Management Service. So that's all about Azure API Management Service. Using this service, you can manage and expose your API without needing to individually exports each one of the front end. You just use a single API service and integrate with your front end. A quick recap what we covered in this video so far. We started by understanding what Azure API Management Service is. Then we explored how it works and discussed the key features. Then we looked how it works behind the scenes with a couple of examples. Then we discussed why you should use this service, and finally we went through the step-by-step demo where we build a front end which is in React and API in Node.js, and we deployed a API using GitHub Actions to an Azure App Service, and we created Azure API Management Service where we imported our APIs, added subscription keys, products, and inbound rule, and we integrated everything with front end and saw the APIs is successfully fetched product, customer and order details. So that's it for Azure API Management Service. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll happy to help you. And as I always say, keep learning, happy coding, and if you found this video very helpful, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe to support the channel. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, have a great day.